I'm Morgan Jones. I'm one of the blood doctors at the University of Michigan, and
I'm Davis Warren, quarterback at Michigan and cancer survivor.
yeah, and so, one thing that I always think about, especially in your cancer, and so in leukemia, is that so many people, when they're diagnosed, have such a kind of bleak outlook on the future.
Mhm.
They hear about this disease, they're afraid of the disease, but here you are playing football after being diagnosed with a disease. Can you talk a little bit about what got you through that?
Yeah, I think just kind of just the day by day, and you kind of realize how kind of finding those little things that make each day better, whether it was something that I could eat that I didn't realize that I knew I couldn't eat the day before, or like being able to get outside and do a little more. And just I always remember, I think it was Stuart Scott who gave that speech at the ESPYs, talks about like, you aren't cancer doesn't define who you are, like you are how you live with cancer. And I think that's something that's always really struck me when I went through it, was like, man, like this doesn't have to define what I'm going to be today. Like even though I'm in the hospital, even though I'm dealing with this, even though I can't do all these things, like what can I still do? And like you come to just appreciate like a lot more little things in life. um and like I said, whether it's like, oh man, I biked an extra 5 minutes today,
Yeah.
or I ate, I had some chips and guac rather than just the chips today because my stomach could handle it, or like, oh, I actually just like got out of my bed today and took a walk. I think just those little things really made the difference.
Were you a hospital food guy or food got snuck into you?
Food got snuck in. No hospital food. Did the hospital food a couple times. I mean, I didn't eat that much.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
like it would be kind of 2 weeks of no eating, and then slowly kind of reintegrating real food into my diet. And yeah, my parents were blessed, and we were in a good area there in Hollywood where a ton of food options were available. And I got sent a lot of DoorDash gift cards. So I really, really executed on trying to find a new spot to try when I was in the mood. And there were a couple times where I was alone in the hospital, and I would sneak down, even with my like pole, and sneak down into the entry circle of the hospital, and grab my food from this DoorDash driver. I'm sure it's horrified that I
Yeah,
was like,
sure. Yeah, yeah,
"Who's
yeah.
this guy walking out of the hospital cell?" But
Hooked up.
but but just like you said, like stuff like that to make you feel better. Like that. That's all that
And
matters.
I think that that ends up being one of the challenges is that, part of the diagnosis is kind of the shock of the diagnosis, but then the other part of the diagnosis is like, oh man, I'm gonna be in the hospital for a month now.
Yeah.
And how did you get through the day? We talked about sneaking food,
Yeah.
but so what did you do to keep your mind sharp while you were in a hospital?
Yeah. I think it took me a while. Like those first, like you said, like that initial shock. I'm sure you have to deal with it over and over again of telling patients these
Sure.
things. And like that initial, I think the first doctor I had who came in was not my, you know ended up being my long-term like oncology doctor, but just a ER doctor.
Sure.
And she came in and she just had great manners, like, and was super respectful in the way that she approached me about it and explained it to me. And obviously, like, there's all those thoughts that go in your head of the worst case scenario when
Right.
you find out about cancer. um, and then in the preceding days, just like the mystery of not knowing, right? Like you don't know
Yeah.
exactly what type or how long. And I think one thing I did that really helped me was I didn't look anything up online.
That's
Like
good.
I was
Yeah.
like
Yeah, yeah,
totally,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't want to like, I just want to know the facts, right? I don't want to live in like a land of maybe this, maybe that.
Right.
What is someone online saying about this, or what? Like I didn't want to do that at all. Um, I know my mom and my dad probably did that a
Sure.
fair amount,
Yeah.
and I don't blame them for it because they were looking out for me and just wanted what was best for me. But I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But I think even like through that first round of treatment, because I went right into it,
Yeah.
like it really took me a couple weeks to really like get in a groove and feel like, okay, well, I'm here. Like now, well, I might as well like study some football. Like
Yeah.
I literally like,
Keep
give
yeah,
me
keep them
something,
keep the mind
and
going. Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wasn't, it was late enough in the school year where they're like, hey, just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But even so, I was like, well, I got these like, I got this like AP class, like AP history class. I kind of like it.
Yeah.
I'd prefer to like keep learning a little bit and like feel like I have something to do, or like I'm accomplishing something in my day. Like, okay, my body doesn't work very well. Like I can't move very much. Like I'm sore, I'm tired, but like my brain still works. So like, what are some things I can do? And then I watched Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
which was the other kind of thing that helped me really. So I really dug into that and got entrenched. And but you can only watch so many episodes
Yeah.
in one day. So
How many did you watch in a day?
I mean, I'd be like, I mean, 4 or 5, and they're like hour-long episodes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
I mix between that, and then I get on. I had to get an exercise bike in my room, and so I, after kind of a couple weeks of being in and starting to feel better, I get on the bike, and like I just think stuff like that, just like create. I'm really big in routines, and like creating. I almost had a routine of every day. Like I'd get up, I'd have my like microwave oatmeal for breakfast. Like I'd try to go on a walk, and then the doctors would come by, and then I'd try to do some work, and then maybe watch an episode or two, maybe take another walk, and then try to get on the bike. Um, and I still have like pictures on my phone of like, okay, like this day I biked, okay, 40 minutes. Oh, I got to 8 miles. Like that was my best. But like 2 weeks ago, I biked for 40 minutes and I only got like 4 miles. So it's just like stuff like that where it's like keep building. Like that makes a huge difference.
And I think the routine piece is super important because we also see patients that that develop routines oftentimes, and usually that tells us that can tell us kind of what direction things are going, because sometimes you have those patients who are walking 4 miles every morning, and then you see them one day and they walk a mile, and you're
Yeah.
like, this
Yeah.
this might be something brewing kind
Yeah.
of thing. I want to circle back to something that I think is hugely important that you referenced, which was that you didn't want to do a lot of the kind of choose your own adventure stuff. You didn't want to say, okay, we could go this way, we could go that way. You just wanted
Yeah.
facts. And that's something that I think about a lot with respect to messaging to patients when you're communicating kind of diagnoses and benchmarks and
Totally.
that kind of stuff. Um, do you remember what that initial communication was like?
I just remember the initial. I will. I mean, I'll never forget the ER doctor walking in, and they actually sent like a social worker in before,
Sure.
which that kind of
That's not
alerted
yet.
me
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
through the whole process. Like kind of a caveat to everything was the fact that I'm a fully almost an adult in a children's hospital.
Right.
So there was like some kind of like uh, just kind of some friction there with that I just had to deal with. But I think so. I kind of knew something was coming, and like she came in with like a box of tissues too, and I'm like, all right, like
Yeah. What is
was
this?
going on? But I just think the way that the ER doctor came in and just was super straightforward about it,
Okay.
and didn't try to dance around it, and just was like, here's what's happening, here's what we're gonna do,
Okay.
and here's like the next steps,
Okay.
and here's and like I think if I remember correctly, she was like saying how many kids go through it, how many kids.
Give you some numbers.
Yeah, give me some real numbers of like we treat a lot of kids and so many of them get better. And she didn't say like, oh, this percent. She said we treated this many cancer kids last year,
Yeah.
and we cured this many. Like
Yeah.
this many kids rang the bell last year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And this like hearing that, like that was a really
Yeah.
just like set me up
Yeah.
to it wasn't like, oh, it's this percentage,
Right.
or like I don't know exactly what like the survival rate is for what I had.
Yeah.
I know it's fairly high, but not as high as a lot of other childhood cancers.
Mhm.
And so I think and then even when I first met with my actual doctor, Dr. Bushwani, my oncology doctor, just she had the same approach.
Yeah.
And it was super matter of fact, straightforward, presented it and like, here's the plan, here's what we're gonna do, here are the benchmarks, and then was like, we're gonna do this.
And even though you were, almost an adult, you're still young, and this is a different kind of adversity compared to
Mhm.
a lot of things.
Yeah.
How much did your parents kind of look to you for the head nod and say we're marching forward versus the
Yeah,
other way?
I think it was. I do think they looked to me,
Yeah.
and they kind of realized that I was mature enough to like look forward, and I didn't need someone all the time or them being like, hey, come on, like we're gonna do this, we're gonna be good. Like I didn't really need that.
You're self-motivated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and my mom was actually like not in LA when I got diagnosed, which is probably like the worst nightmare of
Sure.
of her
All
life.
mom's life, for
And so
sure.
she was losing it. But when she came back and like we were all together, and I just think it was like really just honestly from the doctors were saying like hey, like let's do this. Like we got this in us. They did a great job just surrounding me with resources. And I remember like even someone who played a huge role in that was a sports psychologist in my area, who was a pretty famous guy named Trevor Mowat, who helped me
Yeah.
out a lot.
Okay.
I don't know if you know of
Yeah, I
him.
know of Trevor. Yeah.
And so got in touch with him, and like he was honestly more drove how I like looked at it from a mental side of just trying to stay, neutral, and
Yeah.
the mindset that I need to have, because I think my parents realized that it's a lot, and you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to talk about, and there's a lot of like unknowns that you're dealing with kind of all the time. And I just think like whatever I wanted to do, they were like, all right, let's do it, So it really it worked, and they played a huge role.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that staying neutral is important, and on both sides of the cancer diagnosis, right?
Totally.
From the perspective of the patient, also from the perspective of of physicians,
Yeah.
because you want to kind of stay calm and neutral, when you're trying to move
And
through things.
I think also like just I don't know if I should probably ask you this because I think it's reasonable, but I would sit in, and I believe very strongly, just like, man, how powerful can your mind be, right? And like how much of a difference can it actually make? And I know there's no like scientific or medical, you know, research to back this up, but I would. They told me, they said, hey, you can't go home until your counts, your blood counts get to a certain level.
Yeah.
I think it was like my hemoglobin and my had to get to like point 0.2
Okay.
or something. I don't know the exact number.
So your hemoglobin would have to be higher than that, because 0.2 would be very like your white blood maybe your white blood cell count.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Or maybe the differential,
Sure,
and then
yeah.
the platelets had to be above.
You know too many of these phrases for someone your age. So.
I'd have to go back and check some of my records.
Please don't actually. You probably don't need that.
Yeah. But that's what they told me, and I said, okay, well, I can't make my bone marrow do anything, right? Like it's so funny. Like I wanted to think about it like a muscle, right? Like you train the muscle gets stronger, but your bone marrow is just there, right? And it just exists.
Yeah.
And it's working all the time. And obviously I knew nothing about this before I got treated.
Yeah.
But you learn and a lot when you're going through it. And the doctors did a great job like explaining to me like just the actual mechanics of how your body produces blood cells, and healthy blood cells rather than cancer ones.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, and something me and Trevor talked about was like the only way I can make my bone marrow do anything, there's got to be some connection between my brain and my bone marrow, right? It has to exist in some part of my body. And I said, well, so I'm just going to take 5 minutes every day. I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to think of my bone marrow as this old factory. And it's just going to be like these old wheels that just, need a little WD-40, need to get turning again, need to get churning and moving. And I would just do that every day. And I would just, before I took a shower every day, I would just sit. The only privacy I had in the whole hospital was in the bathroom, basically. And I would sit in there, and before I put my like glove on my whole arm to cover up my port, and I would just be like, hey, like what can I do?
Yeah.
Right. And then I just visualize it, and maybe it did nothing, but I would sit, and I don't expect you to have an answer.
Well,
but
I'll share something with you.
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of my time in the lab. That's actually how I spend most of my time. And there actually is some data, some experimental data in mouse models that show how how nerve changes related to cortisol levels, epinephrine, all these kinds of things, norepinephrine, how these neurotransmitters can impact the bone marrow, and so may not be as as wild as you think, and there's actually active research in that area. So.
I maybe I was
You're ahead
cutting
of your
edge,
time.
cutting edge, exactly.
Cutting edge, man.
But I was, and then like the first round, it's like okay, normally about 3 to 5 weeks after the last day of chemo, that's when we start to see regeneration and send you home. 21st day, boom, right on the dot. They wake you up at 6 a.m. They pull blood. Doctor comes in, you're going home today, and I'm like, awesome, let's do it. So don't know if it was the visualization or if it was the bike or if it was taking walks or what it was, but it's just like stuff like that, whereas like I felt like I was helping myself.
Well, and I think that the biggest part with a cancer diagnosis is that at any age, whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, you get the diagnosis, and there's like this inherent kind of loss of control. It's like I have lost control of who I am in this moment because these people are telling me I have to go down this path now.
Yeah.
And so anything that you can do to maintain control, whether it's establishing a routine, whether it's talking to your bone marrow,
Yeah.
any of these things
No, that's
are
a really
hugely
good way to
important.
put it, because I think that's you want to feel like you have some ability, right? Like I was always an athlete, and like I felt like, well, on the field, like I do have control of the
Yeah,
outcome to a
yeah,
certain extent, and that's what I wanted to feel, right? And
yeah,
so I turned it into a competition,
yeah,
obviously, and I think that just made a huge difference. So it's cool that maybe exists at some
yeah.
point in the future, or something that
I'll send you
gets
I'll send you
explored.
some papers.
Yeah, sounds good. That's awesome.
All right,
Great.
all right.
Thanks. That was fun.